Yo,
What's up, man? How you doing?
good. How are you?
Doing all right. Doing all right.
Doing,
Rushing around, trying to be a dad and business owner and coach all at the same time. It's a lot.
yeah, I bet it is. Is that coffee you got there? Is that what keeps you going?
Damn right.
How many cups a day are you at this point?
Minimum 2 to 3 cups a day. Minimum 2, 3 cups.
Gotcha. Are you getting that feedback?
I am. I'm getting some feedback after. Yeah.
Oh, geez.
Mm.
All right, let's mute my mic. Why is that coming from me, B? All right. There's nothing there now, right?
Not after whatever adjustment you just made. I haven't heard anything yet.
All right. Well, we are literally in UNLV's library. It's where we got to do all of our stuff. So we try to work with what we have. And and yeah. But all right. Anyways, let's. I know you're like you said you're rushing around, so let's jump right into it. First of all, appreciate you jumping on and giving us any of your time because, like you said, you're very busy. For listeners of the show that don't know who you are. I mean, I would imagine you have, like you just told me, multiple titles, but how do you even introduce yourself nowadays?
And it's kind of I've kind of narrowed it down to just saying, Brandon Payne. I'm Stephen Curry's personal skills and performance coach, and I've been that for 12 plus years now, and that takes up most of my time. So that's kind of what I stick with.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I did as much research as I could. There's so much stuff out there about you and about Steph and the process. But you mentioned that. I think somebody asked you, how many other guys you have and this and that. And you're like, well, outside of my two sons, correct?
Correct. Correct.
Yeah, you said outside of that, Steph takes up a lot of time, which I think is fair and makes a lot of sense. But before we get
Hmm.
to arguably the greatest, shooter in my opinion, the most skilled player on the planet, let's kind of talk about your journey as a personal trainer, somebody who
Hmm.
prides himself in the skill standpoint. Where did it start for you? I know you played a little bit. If we can
Hmm.
back up that much, how did that all begin? And did you ever see it ending up the way it did?
Well, no, I never imagined that I would be here. I'm certainly thankful and feel very fortunate to be here. But as a player, a lot of what I do and a lot of my philosophy that I have kind of developed as a trainer came from my own shortcomings as a player and came from the fact that I was hard headed and I didn't listen very much and didn't listen to my father who knew exactly he was a hell of a basketball coach. He knew exactly what I should have been doing. Didn't do a great job of listening and until it was too late. I waited until I got into college to really start working. And by that time, it's too late. And so a lot of the things that I went to work developing were all aimed at getting to players younger, getting to players earlier, being a little bit better, showing them the why and not just the what. I think that that's something that I struggled with was as a player was understanding why everything needed to be done. So that's why I'm so big into that now. But I knew early on, even as a player, that I was a really good shooter. I knew how to operate the things that coaches wanted me to operate. I could execute really well, but just wasn't very talented. And I was self aware enough to know that, and I knew that coaching was always going to be uh, ultimately where my future in the sport would be. And that's where my passion was too. The game has always come a little bit easier to me, I think, than most in terms of understanding X's and O's, understanding the flow of communication as a coach to players, understanding how to make adjustments, and just watching the game a little bit differently. So when I was in college, I went ahead and started coaching. So my junior and senior year of college at Wingate University, right outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, I was on staff, and I already had responsibilities. So some of my responsibilities at that time, and thankfully you don't know anything about this stuff, I had tape exchange. I don't even know if you know what tape exchange is. It's where we actually we had the VHS tapes, and I had to make copies of the tapes and FedEx them to the teams that we were playing, and make clip ups from VHS tape to VHS tape. So my scouts were done that way, and I had to handwrite scouting reports. We didn't have these nice pre-formatted scouts that you guys have now. We certainly didn't have Synergy or anything like that at that time. So that was some of my responsibilities. But my biggest responsibility, though, being the youngest guy on the staff, was kind of managing our players' daily schedules and making sure we had guys getting to class, we had guys getting to study hall, we had guys eating. I know, believe it or not, some folks don't understand. Sometimes it's hard to get college guys to eat everything they're supposed to eat and get the calorie intake that they need to perform at a high level. And then we're asking them to lift, we're asking them to shoot, we're asking them to practice. That's a lot. There's a lot of management, and through that process, the entire time I was, going through all that as a coach, I was thinking that there's got to be a more efficient way to do this. There's got to be a better way to help kind of get the maximum benefit with a minimum amount of time for college basketball players. So at that time, I started to play around with the concept of blending strength and conditioning and skill work together as a way to achieve the things that we needed to achieve, but try to do it in a more compact, more impactful way for our players to help them learn at a little bit of a higher rate. So I started toying around with light load resistance and using it in footwork, using it with one-step explosive stuff. Started using the heavy balls as a way to make mechanical adjustments for shooters, and started learning quickly that, wow, our guys are making very fast adjustments when we add this light loading here. There's got to be some science behind this. So at that point, I started to study a lot more about just how the brain communicates with the body, and how the body gets faster, and how moving things at a higher velocity makes bigger impact on players and their movement, and how explosive they can be, and the faster and the stronger they are, the quicker they pick up skill. So as I was doing that, that was the kind of the basis of what we do now, which is, with Stephen, the reality is at this point in his career, we really have 4 or 5 days a week, a maximum of 90 minutes. And we try to get, all this strength and a skill in those 90 minutes, just because we don't want to put a lot of mileage on his body. But as you can see, we're still getting better, and we're still getting better at a really quick pace. So everything that I do now was kind of born back then in 1999, 2000, 2001. And, I've just been committed to being a lifelong learner. Been committed to getting better myself, not allowing the same flaws and mistakes that I had as a player come back as a coach and as a trainer. So that's kind of how I've arrived at where we are now.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think one of the things you kind of touched on was you made a transition. You said in your junior year of college from that.
Hmm.
Was it playing right into coaching? Were you
Trying to
playing there
play,
at? Yeah,
attempting to play, yeah, attempting to play
right.
to coaching. And I was already coaching youth basketball at the time, and this is before before it was called EYBL. But I was coaching the Charlotte Royals at the time, which is one of the original Nike programs, and so I was already doing that before I took the spot at Wingate as an assistant coach. So coaching had been what I really wanted to do, and I knew that my time as a player was up, and
Yeah.
it was time to go ahead and move on.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of guys, tend to kind of fight that transition, right? And they struggle for a long time with their identity because even though people tell them growing up the ball's going to stop bouncing, you hear the cliche all the time. They just
Yeah.
won't allow themselves to kind of transition into what could be and what I would assume is probably a more rewarding process that is coaching.
Mm.
Would you say, I mean, your time as a player and now your time as a skilled trainer and as a coach, how much more rewarding and what do you get from coaching that maybe playing didn't even give you?
You have a much broader impact, and I've found that I enjoy teaching, and I enjoy the process of teaching, and seeing the confidence that players gain when you help them add something to what they're doing, or seeing the changes in their game when you actually teach somebody how to watch film. I mean, there's so many things that young players don't really understand, and they're really small things, and that can make really big differences. Brad Stevens had a saying that he had when he was with Butler and with the Celtics, and he would always say, "Small hinges swing big doors." These three small hinges create really big openings for people to get through. So those small details make big differences, and so I've kind of enjoyed that process, and kind of getting back to what you were saying earlier about guys trying to hold on. And I think that as players, and I think that the reason that guys try to hold on as players is they have a hard time looking in the mirror and just being honest. And that's one of the reasons why some players' development is stunted as well. They have a hard time looking in the mirror and admitting what they don't do well and what they need to do better to be a better player. Those of us that can look in the mirror and be honest, I think that you have a much quicker and more direct path to what's going to be your success in this sport when you can do that. And I think that's where some guys trying to hold on are just having a hard time doing that.
Right. Yeah. I think it's got to be just rooted in ego. And I think
Mhm.
nowadays more than anything, that can be impacted by the presence of social media, and you see, guys performing at different levels. And yeah, there is that little bit of hold that or blockage, I guess people and players put in their minds. You touched on film. Well,
Mhm.
how I'm obsessed with the game of basketball. We were lucky enough, or I was lucky enough. I'm sorry, I was lucky enough to meet you and Steph during my high school career when we went out to the Bay Area for the SC30 Select Camp, and the attention to detail between you and Stefan is obviously something that's really focused on and talked about. But starting with film, what
Mhm.
makes you and Steph's film session, or yours in general, different than how other players might watch it? Because I'll sit down and, yeah, I'll watch a game, but I
Mhm.
don't I always feel like there's gotta be more of a science to it, or at least something more I could be doing.
Yeah, I think that when you're using film from a development standpoint, and there's different ways to use film, right? I mean, so when I'm not in the building every day, like I'm not in the building with Golden State every day, so from an execution standpoint, I try to stay away from that type of stuff. I try to stay away from speaking on, well, this pass was there, this look was, because that's not my role, that's not my job. Because I don't know what Coach Kerr had wanted him to do there. Same thing with Trey Young down in Atlanta, who I spent some time with, and Michael Porter Jr. Those are the other guys that I do a little bit of work with. I really focus more on them mechanically and them from a skill standpoint, and just looking at really either the shots they're taking, the space that they're creating, or when they get into these shot drive pass scenarios where you're looking at, okay, did we make the correct read based off of what the defense was giving you as an individual, maybe not what you were getting from a team concept standpoint. I think that when you're using film from a skill development standpoint, that there's got to be a balance. I mean, you can't be overly negative. Like, you can't just look at the negative stuff. I'm a 2-to-1 guy. I try to go two positives for every one opportunity. So anytime that I have something to point out to one of those guys, I make sure that, hey, let's start off looking at what we're doing really well. Let's look at how the things that we worked on in the offseason are translating directly into gameplay. With Steph, I don't even have to dig that deeply because everything he does is on social media. So I mean, it's pretty easy just to grab some stuff and
Yeah.
break it down real fast. But um, and I think that you have to have a willing learner. You have to have somebody that's okay with being told, hey, this is probably not as good as it should be. Fortunately, Steph and I, are at the point in our relationship, 12 years in, where if it was just bad, I just tell him, that was it just really wasn't that good.
Right. Yeah.
And sometimes even more and more colorful language than that. But with younger players, you have to. Everybody's got a different learning style. Everybody's got a different communication style. So when you're using film, it's really, you have to identify how the player learns. I mean, that's the biggest thing. And are they visual learners? Like some guys, that it might be more effective to give the film to them to watch first. Here, take a look at these clips. Call me. We'll talk about them. Some guys, I probably need to go ahead and go in there and break down and illustrate and voice over what's going on and then send it to them. Some guys, we just need to watch it together. So it's identifying, who needs which version of communication, um, who needs more positive reinforcement, who can take the negativity that comes with the opportunities a little bit better than others. And you kind of have to utilize all those different things from a communication standpoint to determine how you watch that film with those players. And so I think that if you're not watching yourself play, though, it's going to be really hard to get better. It is the single most effective tool we have, is the ability to watch what you're doing, and not only watch what you're doing, but when you're watching those possessions, when you're watching those shots, you got to take a look at what the other nine guys on the floor are doing. And so understanding your shot, understanding what other opportunities may have been there, and it's one of those things. Again, being very fortunate to be around Coach Kerr's practices, he's real big on good to great, good shot to great shot. And there might have been, you might have taken a lot of good shots, but there might have been some great shots available too. So just understanding that to help you with decision making, with shot, drive, pass decisions, is important too.
It's funny you bring up the good to great because I was just on the way over here listening to the Old Man in the Three Pod with Steph that he did with JJ Redick, and they were talking about the good to great and how Coach Kerr came in and that was the staple, and then he had that play against the Clippers, which everybody's seen a million times, where they say that might be the greatest move I've ever seen. Everybody laughs. He's like, "No, I'm being serious." But
Yeah.
that's awesome. Yeah, I
It
think
wasn't a great shot though. It might have been the
yeah.
worst shot they could have had that possession. It was a great move, worst shot in the possession, but it happened to go in. So we'll take it.
The result of it, yeah, I mean, Steve Kerr, I think, resembled everybody watching that game with the hands up first and then just I
Hmm.
mean, that's what Steph does. Um, you mentioned kind of the receptiveness from a player, and I think,
Hmm.
my question is, a lot of people have their idea of the NBA player. They have the guy who's, making all this money, who's, essentially reached his pinnacle. You don't get that feeling at all from Steph ever. However, was he as receptive from the jump when you guys met in is it 2011? Am I correct saying that?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Was he as did you notice that and pick up on his willingness to learn? Because I know they talk with Michael Jordan all the time how he was a sponge, and when Bobby Knight was around, you would have thought
Yeah.
Jordan never played a basketball game in his life with all the things he wanted to learn. Was that
Mhm.
Steph in every facet of his game when you met him in 2011?
Immediately in the first workout we had. He and I've told a lot of people this. The one thing that Stephen Curry does better than any other player I've ever worked with is he asks the best questions, and he asks questions that signify how engaged he is as a learner and signify how detailed he can be as a worker, because he wants to understand every benefit of everything we're doing. And I'm real big on making sure that we have multiple layers of benefits in every drill we do. And the more a player can understand about the different layers and the systems of the body that we're trying to train and attack in each drill, the more detailed they can be. And Stefan, has really, separated himself from everybody because he's such not only a student of the game of basketball, but he's a student of his body, and he understands how his body has changed. And the silver lining behind all the injuries he's had early in his career was that it forced him to learn everything about joint by joint responsibility from the ground up. So understanding how your ankles, knees, and hips are all connected, and how joint dysfunction at one joint can cause a problem at another, and then how those joint dysfunctions cause a problem in our shooting mechanics and our movement mechanics. So he became such a great student of his body that he just took that same concept of learning about his body and he applied it to everything that we do, whether it be strength conditioning, whether it be shooting, whether it be ball handling, whether it be stuff we're doing from a film standpoint, or the conditioning drills and things that we do. He's been such a great student. He's an engaged learner. And there are a lot of players in the NBA, and there's a lot of guys that, quite frankly, are either in the G League or out of the NBA that did not really fully realize what they could be as a player because they were resistant as learners, or they were unable to really grasp what the coach player relationship is at the professional level. At the professional level, the coach player relationship is more of a partnership. It's more back and forth in terms of you're working together, but to achieve you as the best player. It's not so much that way in college. It's a little bit different because the players are younger. They need a little bit more direction. The talent level is a little bit different. At the NBA, at that level, you're there for a reason. and everybody's well aware of why you're there. So at that point, you can't view the coach as necessarily an authority figure. He is to an extent, but he's really your partner. He's really there to provide you the structure that you need to become a better player. And a lot of young players, especially now, they build walls. They put up walls, and and they become resistant as learners. They become resistant to the partnership, and that really stunts their growth. And it also, I mean, it can get you out of the league because there's only 450 of these spots. I mean, there's a hell of a
Mhm.
lot more than 450 guys that play in that league. And so it doesn't take a whole lot for you to trickle out of the league. Stefan, had the advantage obviously of growing up in the NBA, and he grew up with a father who really had to work hard. And you're obviously way too young to ever have seen Dell play. I'm sure you've seen some clips. Dell was great.
Clips.
I
Yeah.
grew up as a Charlotte Hornet season ticket holder. So I grew up going to watch Dell play, 41 nights a year. And Dell was great, but Dell wasn't going to out athlete you. He wasn't going to outskill you. He was going to outsmart you. He was the first guy that I remember, really even more so than Reggie Miller, of relocating and creating space with movement to catch and shoot. Reggie Miller did it in a little bit of a different way. Dell really at the time used that 3-point line as a threat at all times. And so Steph had that had that experience of watching his father and how he worked. And one of the things that really drove Stephen when we first got together was he always talked about all the things that Dell had to do those last 2 or 3 years he played, to really get ready to play, and how he didn't want to have to go through that, how he wanted to get out in front of all that stuff. So we based a lot of the stuff we did at the time and trying to prolong his career. But from the very beginning, he was a very engaged learner. Even, we had big groups of players, because when he first came to me, it was during the NBA lockout, and there were workouts where we would have 15, 20 guys. And I mean, they were all NBA players, and they were good NBA players. And he stood out amongst that group. And even though at the time he was very young in the league, and he was in there with multiple All-Stars, some world champions, but it's still, there was just a difference in how he chose to learn and how he chose to work that separated him then. And the gap between him and a lot of players has only grown because we've gotten so much smarter and so much more precise with how we're working. Not only has Stefan gotten better, but the rate at which he got better forced me to learn and adjust and get better as well, because I got to try to stay in front of him. And
Right.
so, yeah, he's been a great learner the entire time.
Yeah, how much of Steph's how much of that gap between Steph and the other players on the floor, whether it be in 2011 when you first met him or when we watch games now, how much of that is psychological for him? And how much of that is worked on between that, and how much of that is just when I met Steph, he had something a little bit wired a little differently than other guys. Yeah, I mean, he has unconscious confidence, like almost delusional confidence that I mean, like we just said, it was a horrible shot against the Clippers, but he's the only
Yeah.
person in the world who's going to shoot it. How much of that is
Mhm.
is mental?
I think that the way that he works, and the detail that he approaches everything with, does give him that kind of intoxicating confidence that he plays with. I mean, it's really, that's the way he describes it, and that's the way I describe it, as somebody that's there with him every step of the way. When I'm watching him, I kind of feel the same thing that he's feeling. And there are games where I'll be watching and I'm sitting there thinking it can't be this easy. It can't be, but it just is. And
Right.
I think that he is so confident and so you know, he's just so engaged with his process, that process has given him just this almost feeling of invincibility out there. And we've worked on so many combinations and so many different scenarios, and there's literally it would be hard for you to come up with a combination that we haven't repped over and over and over again. We might not have repped it last summer, but you can go back 3, 4, 5 years. And when you're the type of learner, and he's almost like artificial intelligence, like he learns as he goes, but he has incredible recall. He can go back years and pick up and pull out something that we've done in the past. So he's got the all those reps, and he's got all that work, that base of confidence. And then it only takes one ball leaving his hand the right way in a game, and you're in trouble.
Right.
Because as a defender, quite frankly, if he missed, it had nothing to do with you. It's you didn't affect it. He just
Right.
missed. I think
Right.
there's some young defenders out there that think that they're the reason, but they might have had one good game against them defensively, and then they learned the hard lesson the second time they played them, or the next couple of times they played them. There's some guys that like to talk a little bit that I enjoy watching the second and third time.
Yeah, it's always funny. He's like a casino. You might beat him one night, you might catch him on an off night, but over the course of time, the house always wins, and
Mhm.
Steph has showed that over and over and over again. It is funny to watch, and I never thought about that, but it is the younger guys who just maybe haven't had enough times
Well,
to play yet.
they're excited to get out there, and I think that there's still the eyeball test, right? I mean, everybody he's a little bit smaller. He's not smaller from a strength standpoint anymore. Now, he's controlling you out there, but that league is a league of extremely large men and very
Yeah,
athletic and fast men, and I still think that it's kind of like the same thing that maybe Larry Bird went through at one point, where he can't be that good, because
right.
he just doesn't look the part, right? He just doesn't look the but
Uh,
but you learn pretty fast. He is that good.
yeah, you find out quickly. That's funny. So his confidence comes from his preparation and process. I don't think that's a new. That's not something novel by any means. He talks about it a lot. I think young players and a lot of people are always looking for, what is, he's got to have this like book he reads or potion he has, in his back pocket. You know what I'm saying? That gives him a different level. But it's really good to hear you say, well, you can't point to anything other than how he prepares. And then the question becomes, well, how does he prepare differently? So, what is his process, whether it be the structure of the workout that you have for him? How is that different than everybody else's?
Well, it's again, it just comes from a little bit of a deeper understanding. So, when we're shooting the basketball, I'm watching the flight of the ball, but a lot of people, when they watch the flight of the ball, and a lot of coaches tend to focus on the finish of the shots. They're really working on the hands. Our philosophy, and the philosophy that Stefan and I share, is that your hands are some of the parts below your hands. So if there's something wrong at your hands, that means something wrong went wrong below your waist. And so we're really looking at the base. We're looking at the movement. So when we're tracking the flight of the ball, and we're tracking the left right, we use the Noah product. Most of the time the adjustments and things that we make are actually at his feet, are actually at his base. So we have a little bit of a different thought process. And then if there is something going on with his upper body, it's typically a mobility issue. So if he's got a little bit of tightness in his shoulders, or if he's got one side of his core that's a little bit more active than the other, we know that's where the twist is coming from. He's got a little bit of looseness in his hips, so his hips do kind of rotate over the top of each other from time to time. So we just have some verbal cues that we use to make those corrections. Um, it's I honestly, I think so much of how we're able to work the way we work is that we have our own vocabulary, we have our own language. We don't have to say a whole lot during workouts to make big communication impacts. When
Right.
you've got that working relationship and you've got that workflow that we have, we're able to get the most out of every single minute in there, because we're not trying to get to know each other. We're not trying just something new for the
Right.
hell of it. I think that players should really look at the success he's had by kind of staying with one guy, and having a partner with you through your career, and kind of really think about that. There are a lot
Mhm.
of guys out there that are really good teachers, that are really good trainers, and they do a great job. Um, but if you go to three or four different guys, you're going to get three or four different answers to the same question. And that doesn't make any
Right.
of them wrong at all. It doesn't
Right.
make them wrong at all. But everybody has a different pathway that they teach and they show to get to the end result, the desired result. And I think that it's almost like running on a treadmill. It's kind of like doing a lot of hard work, but you're really going nowhere. And I think that when you
Mhm.
get different messages and things, that can happen for young players. So I think that guys should probably, look to partner up with somebody that works best for them, and kind of stick with it through their career. And I think that you will get further each off season, because what allows me to, it allows me to communicate with the team. I can talk to the team and say, hey, what are your goals for him from a team standpoint? Then I can talk to Steph and say, hey, what are your goals from an individual standpoint? Then I have my goals from, so we have, three different sets of goals that we're able to incorporate into one, productivity plan. And
Hmm.
if you're going from person to person, you don't have that communication with your agent or the team, and it's just hard. In my opinion, it's hard to get better quickly.
Yeah, that makes sense. You said that you use the Noah system, so I have to ask, what is Steph's optimal entry angle with that Noah system that's telling you, where the ball's
Yeah,
coming into the rim at?
he's really consistent at 49, 49, 50. Really consistent. We utilize the feedback from that system. We use mostly left to right though.
Okay.
He doesn't have a lot of arc issues. If he does, we'll flip it on. We're never short. And if he is short, you'll hear me about the only time I'll lose my mind in workouts is if we're missing short. There's not a whole lot I can get pissed off at more than missing shots short because that's just confidence misses. But the left to right is where we really focus because he's so dynamic, and a lot of his space creating is working laterally. So when you work laterally, you're going side to side a lot. The ball flight can get off if you're not mechanically sound. So we use that left to right pretty consistently. And there are a lot of times, and I talked about this last year, but we don't like any of his shots against air to go in outside of 2 inches. You got 2 inches to the left, 2 inches to the right. We don't really want to get outside of that working against air because of those shots in the games, if you're outside of two, are going to be misses. So that's how we utilize that.
Yeah, it's the whole aim small, miss small, part of the game for sure. I like the part about short, equating that to just a confidence miss. Now, I also read somewhere that you said we don't do a lot of low heart rate catch and shoot, 10
Mm-mm,
makes, 5 spots. However, you
no.
walk into any college gym, you walk into any high school gym, and you have probably 90%, if not higher, of a workout being catch and shoot shots. How often does Steph ever do that, if at all?
So we'll do a little bit at the start of the workout just to get going. We almost like you would treat kind of like a form shooting and just a catch and shoot kind of rhythm, and then we'll do a little bit of volume at the end of a workout where there's a little bit of catch and shoot. But everything that's in between, we do try to match heart rate. We do try to do interval shooting where we go really high heart rate shooting for really short bursts, and then we'll go to more of a stationary. But even when we go stationary, we do a lot of multi-direction footwork stuff. So he might look like he's stationary, but we're working on a different footwork pattern on every catch.
Yeah.
In college, a lot of college coaches they like to use the same two or three. You got a curl, you got a pop, you got a fade.
Mhm.
And that's okay because that's what works in their systems. With Stefan, because he has to be so creative with how he's spacing before the catch, we have to work on a lot of different footwork combinations and a lot of different footwork catches. So, when we go to what looks like stationary, we're actually changing footwork. We're changing range about 2 or 3 feet on every shot.
Yeah, so, when you say that footwork, even in a catch and shoot scenario when he's working out, what would you say, like a 2 by 2 foot box, he's moving his feet at different angles,
A little,
360 degrees?
probably a little bit more than that. We
Okay.
have what we call a four-way footwork pattern. Excuse me, where we've got a 1-2 step to the pass. We've got a 1-2 step escaping away to catch as you're backpedaling. We've got a 1-2 step lateral away and a 1-2 step lateral two. And then we'll get into curl pop, your traditional curl pop and fade as well. But
Right.
that four-way footwork is really what we work on a lot of, because especially the escape step 1-2, because that's what he gets a lot of when he comes out of screening situations. So when they get into their split action and he's the guy that's pinning down, a lot of times, like if it's him and Clay Thompson running that split together, and Clay runs that tight wrap action, Stefan just has an escape 1-2 to catch and shoot. So that's where that footwork is kind of born, is out of the screening action, because he's such a good screener, and they utilize so many off the ball screens with him. that we have to make sure that not only we're working on the footwork, but we're working on the balance aspects because he's coming from a contacted situation to a free situation. So kind of like you hear them talking about in football, running backs have really good contact balance, like they get contacted running through the line, but they've got good enough balance to keep going. It's kind of the same thing in screening situations because you're going to receive contact and you got to come out of that contact balanced and ready to shoot. So we work on giving a little bit of contact at the screening or at the mesh point, and then we work on that footwork coming out of there. But that's after like a high heart rate situation for 15, 20 seconds. Then we'll go to about a minute or so of the four-way footwork. So it's just working with purpose. Like you have to have a purpose behind
Mhm.
everything you do. You have to understand, again, systems of the body, whether it be the cardiovascular system, neuromuscular, all these different things that we're trying to, achieve. You just have to work with purpose, pace, and precision. You've got to have those three things at all times, and that's what we try to do.
You said purpose, pace, and precision. That's great.
Mhm.
Um, with just how obsessed he is with the game of basketball, what is his, I guess, post Tahoe golf tournament day look like when you guys are really in it, getting ready for training camp?
Though right now, again, it's something that's kind of evolved over time. In terms of the amount of time that we spend working, the amount of time that is spent on recovery, the detail that we're looking at in terms of um, you know from a nutrition standpoint, our staff has grown. We've got a really good strength guy. I kind of had to offload that a little bit a few years ago because we had to go from an in season, off season to more of a 12-month calendar with the strength. And so, now, like I said, we're trying to get everything we can get done physically with him done in about a 90-minute period each day that we're working. And then the remainder of the day is making sure that he's going through recovery. He built a nice, really nice recovery room in the house. Trust me, he's got plenty of room. So
Yeah,
we've
I
got
bet.
We've got a nice weight room and a nice recovery area there at the house. So he's using the infrared sauna. He's using the cold plunge. He's using all the technology that we have at our disposal from a recovery standpoint. So there's just as much emphasis put on that as there is on the physical work.
Right.
He's gotten a lot better about sleep. Early in his career, he was a real big TV guy. Late at night, I think the combination of getting a little bit older, having three kids now, having multiple businesses, as well as being an NBA player, has kind of helped him become a little bit more tired at night. So he goes to bed a little
Right.
earlier. So sleep has gotten better, but yeah, I mean, it's you know performance. It drives everything he does every day,
Yeah.
and it drives the schedule. It drives everything we do. So it's a thought in your mind at all times. If you're going to be that good, pretty much everything you do has to revolve around you being the best you can possibly be every day.
Yeah, no, for sure. Steph, he's a cold plunge guy, huh?
He's gotten into the kind of the hot cold contrast stuff. So
Right.
out of the sauna into the plunge, yeah, type thing.
Now,
I forget how many minutes he's up to now, but he's all proud about it. So I'll check in with him when I get back out there this week.
well, does he go the question it's the cold plunge neck down, right? He's all the way
I
in?
believe, yeah, he's got the tub, so you lay down in it, and
Right.
yeah, your neck up, out, everything else is in.
Okay, well, if it's not neck down, it doesn't really count. So, if you see him, you just let him know that
I'll let him
whatever his
know.
minutes are.
I'll let
That's
him
awesome,
know.
though. That seems to be kind of a just something that athletes and just people in general have really started doing, and we have one over here. So it's kind of a like the last thing you want to do during the day. So I figure it's got to have some mental positive aspect of the cold plunge. That's cool that he's all in. I'm sure Joe Rogan would be happy to talk to him about that for 3 hours at some point in his career. But yeah, no, that's really awesome. How much do you think Steph Curry's, or I should back it up, how much do you think Jordan Poole getting drafted to Golden State has an impact on how what he's become? Obviously, we know Jordan Poole is a talented person and an individual, and I know you've worked with him from time to time. But I mean, it's obvious to a basketball player, to a casual, that he almost tries to emulate Steph in everything he does. And you talked about the intoxicating confidence that he has. Is that a
Mhm.
huge impact on his career in your from your perspective?
Yeah, I think that first off, I think anybody that gets drafted into that organization and into that culture there, you're very fortunate because it's unlike any other organization in the NBA. It is very different. I do have the opportunity to see different teams and the way they operate, and it's a different group out there, and a lot of that's player led. Of course, Coach Kerr has a lot to do with that and the success that he's had. But when you have your best players, your hardest worker, I mean it you kind of everybody else has to kind of fall in line. I've had the fortunate experience of being around the Spurs for some, and I hear them talk about how when Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili and Tim Duncan let Popovich cuss them out, nobody else could really, everybody else just kind of has to fall in line and listen just like they do. So it's a little bit different in Golden State from that standpoint, but it is a player
Yeah.
led thing. And Steph, I was out there last Saturday, and I'm going back this Saturday as we're kind of working back from this injury. And Steph was on the floor for 2 hours, and while Stephen was on the floor, every player in the organization came and went while he was still working. It was a game day, so they didn't have a whole lot to do, but still every player came in, got treatment, got their shots up, and left in the amount of time that he was working and working at a really high
Wow.
pace. And when you see that, you know, it kind of makes you feel a certain way as a player, like, well, if he's doing that, maybe I should be in here doing that.
Mhm.
I vividly remember the first time Jordan Poole watched us work out, and he sat over. They have an interesting like bar area where they have all their supplements and everything for post workout, and he sat over at that bar and he was just watching, watching, watching. And I think, he watched for about an hour, and we were walking off. He stopped me and said, "Does he always work that fast?" And I said, "That yeah, we always work that fast. We always work at that." Because I've never seen anything like that. I said, "Well, you should try it. You should come out and try it." He was a little bit reluctant at first because it can be, I mean, you went through it, and I still
Mhm.
tell people about the time that you showed up at 5:30 in the morning and had Mike Weinstein push your flight back so you could stay and work out with us after we were in San Francisco playing a game the night before. So you kind of felt that a little bit. I think we were all a little tired that morning. It might not have been at full pace, but yeah, I mean it but yeah, I mean, so he was reluctant at first, but then he slowly started to come around to it. He has his own work, he's got his own people and his own kind of
Yeah,
work pace that
yeah.
he goes through. But seeing Stefan every day certainly helps. It helps a lot. And because it shows you what that guy had to do to become what he is, and it just gives you that template to kind of follow. Now that doesn't mean you need to do the exact same drills or this or that and the other, but you do have to kind of have that internal drive that Stefan has to go out there and do it every day. And I think that championship summers are tough, and I think that some of the younger guys, it was hard for them to understand this summer that, hey, you really should be working kind of harder than
Mhm.
maybe you worked last summer, because it's going to be even more difficult this year to come back and repeat. And I think that the human nature kind of snuck in on some of them a little bit, and they kind of relaxed, and now they're getting going. Now they're playing well, and they're
Right.
where they need to be. So I think that, and that's the other thing about the NBA, and that's the other thing about Jordan is, handling success in the NBA is a huge part of the process, because the more successful you become, the more people are just coming after you. And so you need to work and prepare at a different level to be successful year after year after year. And I think that he's learned that now, and you're seeing him now put back to back seasons together. They're impressive. And I think that he naturally has a confidence. He's a naturally
Oh,
confident
yeah.
guy, and I
Yeah.
think that helps him a lot of times, because sometimes that confidence can look a little bit like, maybe there was a better shot out there than the one you just took, but he makes a lot of them too, and that's what makes him so difficult to guard, is because he's so unpredictable as a scorer, so unpredictable as a shooter. And just like Stephen, it only takes one ball coming off his hands the right way for him to catch fire, and then at that point you're just chasing him everywhere, hoping he misses. And so they have a lot of firepower, and I think that that Jordan is now fully taking advantage of the fact that he has Steph in there with him every day, and he's not only learned from him, but I think that he's getting to the point now to where he can maybe show Steph a thing or two also because he's so creative. He's very creative with
Mhm.
how he scores.
Yeah, the unpredictability factor between both of them is there is no game plan for that. You got to be on your toes at all times, especially on the defensive end. But yeah, you touched on the time that I was able to come and work out with you and with Steph when we were out in the Bay Area during that high school camp. And I mean, shoot, I'll never forget that for the rest of my life. Just like a lot of people's experiences with Steph. How you get to see him in a different light than other people. You get to see him
Mhm.
off the court. You get to see him interact without cameras on. How is there something different? We know that there's a difference as a player, but as a person too. How close have you gotten to him and seeing? Is there anything that sticks out that separates him as a person as well? Because that was my biggest takeaway was how he treated me. He didn't have to let me come work out at 5:30 in the morning. He was probably tired. He just put on a camp for kids that he didn't get anything technically out of it. He's doing it for reasons of his own. But is there anything that you can kind of point to that just kind of separates him as a person?
Well, I mean, just little things. I mean, obviously, my kids have grown up with him. They don't really know a world without him. But it was my son Carson's birthday yesterday, and I got Stefan texting me. You know, can't believe he's 15 years old, and I'm sending pictures of Steph of when Carson was 2, and he was in here with Steph, and now now they're almost Carson's up there with him, and so it's a little bit different our relationship. We spend more time probably talking about our kids now than honestly than basketball. So our relationship is definitely grown in that way, very close. But what you see on camera is pretty much what you get. I mean,
Mhm.
he doesn't. I've come across some players that will put up a little bit of a different front for the cameras, but that's not who he is. He's very comfortable in his own skin. He's very comfortable with who he is, and what you see is what you get. He's a great guy, and I've been very very fortunate to have the career that I've had with him, and everybody keeps telling me that he's ruined me for every other player, and that might be true. But I've certainly I wouldn't be anywhere near where I am today without him. So I certainly appreciate everything he's done.
No, that's awesome. I think that was I mean, my parents, we had actually a few brush-ins with Steph. One at an all-star game. He brought me down courtside to watch the dunk contest. I mean, just little things like that that you don't ever forget. Um, but now with are you at Impact right now at your or at Accelerate right now?
Yeah, I'm here right now. Yeah, yeah.
So
I was
what
in
does
the
that look
Bay.
like? What does Accelerate look like today?
Today it's really more for my teams and my sons, just because the day-to-day operations, it gets very difficult to operate day-to-day stuff when you spend half your year in the Bay Area and
Mhm.
or in some other places. So we'll have some folks that want to come into town that want to have me break their shot down and help them with that, and so we do that from time to time. um, our Under Armour team comes in here, they work out, and my sons are in here every day. They work out, and we have a strength conditioning coaches in here that work people out. But my ability to be involved day to day in the workouts here is kind of tough now.
Yeah.
But I still use it for my office, and we have a nice weight room here and a lot of film equipment, a lot of technology here. And then we're going to be making some videos here to that'll be kind of like an online platform for players to kind of follow to.
Yeah, are you in the online training sphere at all right now?
Man, it's tough. I'm really bad with social media too. I wish I was better. I'm trying to get better. I probably need to get some advice from you on that.
Mhm.
I'm my days. Unfortunately, I don't wake up thinking to run to Instagram first thing in the morning. I'm trying to get my
Right,
kids
right.
ready for school and trying
Yeah.
to get to the office, trying to get my workouts in and worrying about their workouts. But that's where I got to get better. We've got obviously, there's some things out there that have shown me talking about shooting and shown me talking about stuff, but it is
Yeah.
something I'd like to get into. I'd like to have an online community of coaches and an online community of players. Talking about shooting and player development. That's something I'd like to do within the next year. It's just making sure that I can put together something that's quality and something that's good and something that's beneficial for everybody, and making sure I got the time to service it. That's really where I'm at.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, everything I hear, in terms of your training and your path is kind of based on your ability to accept and implement new technology. So I guess, that's why I was wondering, I'm like, I'm surprised just with what I'm assuming is a crazy load of people wanting your attention because
Oh,
you're
there's a
Steph Curry
bunch.
straight right, right. You know what I'm saying? So like, hey, work it just like you said for a shot breakdown. I just didn't know, if you're moving kind of in towards that way you don't necessarily have to be there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm excited to kind of follow that and see how that progresses. One of my things I wanted to ask you before we get out of here is what the hell does Steph Curry do after he's done playing basketball?
Man, um, I don't know. I mean,
What
he
could you
pretty
see
much
him do?
whatever
I
he
mean, because
wants,
yeah,
anything
for
he wants.
sure, for sure.
We had one conversation about this maybe a summer or two ago, and I just we were talking about it right before work. I was like, what do you want to do when you're done? And he looked at me and said, I think I want to coach high school basketball. I said, man, you're crazy as hell. You don't want to coach high school basketball. I don't think you would enjoy. But the thought of him not being in basketball, I think, just drives him crazy. And he
Yeah,
wants to, he wants to keep playing. He wants to be involved in basketball and certainly involved in golf. But he's such a successful businessman and philanthropist now. So he's got Curry brand to grow. He's got all the different business entities that his kind of business conglomerate owns and operates, and then he's got all of his charities, and so there's plenty to keep him busy. But he's not going to be done playing basketball for a long time. He's got a
right,
lot left. We're very lucky. In some ways lucky, in some ways it was difficult. He didn't come into that physical prime as early as a lot of guys. He came into that physical prime a little bit later, which made it more difficult on him physically earlier in his career, but it forced him to learn and adapt differently. So now, he has all those adaptations. He's got all that learned behavior from early in his career. And now he has all that strength and he's got that size and he's got the ability to physically compete, and that's why you're seeing such a complete player now that's just continuing to get better. I don't think he's going to be done anytime soon, but when he is done, he certainly has his options open of what he wants to do.
yeah. I
I don't
asked
think
just
you're going to see him
because
on TNT or anything like that, but I think that he'll do something.
yeah, yeah, because there seems to be kind of two routes for people who are so obsessed with the game of basketball that they can't live without it. After playing in the association, it seems to be, like you said, a Richard Jefferson TNT personality, which Steph has. I mean,
Hmm.
people who follow him, love his personality. Or you see coaching, and we talked earlier about seems like some guys have that in them to do, and
Hmm.
other guys, they despise the thought. They're like, "I couldn't do it. I don't have the patience." But it's cool to hear that's a thought. And at the high school level, might be the most they'll need a bigger venue, whatever high school
That's right.
he's gonna, even if it's Duncanville down in Texas, who I think has the biggest arena possible, they're gonna need a bigger one.
Mhm.
But no, that's really cool. Well, I think that's about all I have. Actually, that's not true. I could sit and talk to you for 3 hours about your process. I told somebody earlier in the week that we were going to have you on the podcast, and they told me, well, just don't nerd out. Don't nerd out the whole time. You know, they said try to keep it, a little bit more layman esque questions that people are going to
Yeah.
understand, and don't go too deep down the rabbit hole. But I'll tell you what, I have nothing but extreme appreciation from the time I met you to now doing more research and digging. And after my career is done here, if there's that couch right there at Accelerate is open, I'd love to sleep on it a
It
few nights and just learn from you.
Love to have you here, man. Love to have you here.
Uh, awesome. Well, let's wrap this up. I know you got things to do. I appreciate you so much, and we'll stay in touch.
Yes, sir, man. Thank you for having me.
All right, Brandon. See you later. All right, folks. Well, that was Brandon Payne, Steph Curry's skill and development trainer. Um, and honestly, just taking my headphones out here. Um, for a long time, I've had what what is a podcast? I don't even know what that means anymore. I've had access to a microphone, I guess, for some years, and have always had a thought of wanting to do a podcast. But recently, I feel like I've toyed around with the idea of the direction we want to go with it. And as I finish up my college career, I have to ask myself, well, what is going to mean the most, 10, 20 years down the road to me? Um, do I want it to be solely an entertainment factor? And what I figured out is, I don't find myself witty or funny enough to do a impulsive or, whatever type podcast where you just talk to your boys. I think what I want to do is transition into something like this, where I bring in people who it's a simple formula. I mean, Rogan's been doing it now for, I don't know, 20 years. You bring in people you think are interesting, you bring in people that bring value to it, and you have a conversation that otherwise other people won't hear. And I'm not overly concerned about where our viewership numbers are or anything like that. And I think that's a beautiful place to be because I wasn't always there. It was always about, well, who can we have on? How can we get the most views? What crazy question can I ask that's going to get clickbait? And I think that's just stupid. It's not what I want to do. There's enough of that out there on the internet. And as we kind of move into something that's more valuable, I use the word value a lot recently. I want to provide value through an entertaining, platform, of course, which is a podcast where you get to see and hear people for who they really are. Just like you just got to hear Brandon Payne, who a lot of times is on, ESPN or, different short 1 to 2 minute segments. And he doesn't really get to tell you everything about him. He doesn't get to get into the fact that, he played basketball and his junior year of college switched over to being a coach. And without that transition, would have never kind of found his calling and ran into a guy named Steph Curry. So that to me, that conversation right there means more to me, I think, than anything I've done on a microphone or on a podcast to date. So that's the direction we're moving, folks. If you don't like it, be sure to subscribe to Brandon Wong's personal podcast where he talks about pop culture and films. Brandon doesn't have that podcast yet, so you're stuck with me. All right, that's it. That's all I wanted to say as we sign off here on the Brandon Payne episode. All right, we love you guys. Peace.